Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Life in the Wildlands podcast, where we discuss exciting opportunities with outdoor careers, share professional experiences, and provide advice to overcome the hurdles to federal employment. And I'm your host, Becky Schufelt, and today we have Sasha Travaglio, who is an interpretive park ranger with the National Park Service, and she's going to share how she started her career and provide advice for those that want to pursue a career in this type of field. So thank you for joining us today, Sasha. Go ahead and tell us more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I have been working with the National Park Service for about a little over 6 years now, and I have fairly diverse experience in the park and before I started with the Park Service. And I think it's really valuable to get more young people and more diverse communities involved with the NPS and in federal careers. So I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Well, we're so happy to have you here with us. And how did you start your career with the National Park Service and get to where you are today?
So I had kind of an unusual path to the Park Service. I took a while to graduate from college. I took about 7 years to get my bachelor's, which was longer than most folks. I worked part-time and went to school part-time. And I got my first bachelor's degree in business because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do and thought it was pretty broadly applicable. It really has helped me get where I am today. After I graduated, I started working in child welfare. And then eventually, after a few years working in nonprofit child welfare, I moved into environmental education. So I worked with some nonprofits like the Audubon Society and a local museum to provide outdoor experiences with youth. And then I started going back to school for a second bachelor's in fisheries and wildlife sciences. And that was kind of what jump started my way or kind of like guided me to a career with the National Park Service. So as you do when you're working seasonally, which is what I was doing, you're always looking for new opportunities, even if you like the one you're in for that season. So I happened upon this position with Joshua Tree National Park, and it was in the education branch, which is the branch of interpretation that works with school groups. So doing in-classroom visits to local classrooms around the park and field trips. So providing field trips to students that are in the local community and also, within a couple of hours from the local community. So I applied to that position, and that was what is called the Pathways program. And the Pathways program is a federal program that engages either recently graduated college students or college students that are actively going to school. And because my program was pretty flexible and I could take a lot of my classes online, I was able to start working for Joshua Tree National Park in that position and complete my second bachelor's in fisheries and wildlife sciences. So I did a few different things, and then I started going to school more focused on what I decided I wanted to do, which was a career in the outdoors. And that was how I found my career in the NPS.
Yeah, it's excellent to hear that you went through the Pathways program, which I haven't had a guest on here yet. I mean, it's been mentioned in other podcast interviews as an
Mhm.
option. Can you explain more about the Pathways program?
Yeah, so the Pathways program is kind of like the Pathways program is a federal program that is focused on getting more youth into the Park Service. And it's what's called a special hiring authority. I'm sure the guests in the past have discussed USA Jobs, which is, a lot. And
A
one of the,
very challenging hiring process is
yeah,
the one way to get a job is through USA Jobs. It's the only way. It's online and it's very complex.
yes, USA Jobs is not user friendly. It can be the biggest barrier for folks getting into the NPS, navigating USA Jobs, because I'm sure, as you discuss with your clients, and as you've probably discussed on this podcast, a federal resume is exhausting and exhaustive. But, anyways, so when the Pathways program, it is a hiring authority that you can look for on USA Jobs. So, when the Pathways Hiring Authority is applied, that means that the only folks who can apply for a position have to be either recent graduates if they're recruiting recent graduates, or current students if they're recruiting current students, which I believe you have to choose one or the other. There are some contingencies to being a Pathways employee. So you have to continue going to school at least part-time while you are working. So that can be challenging and kind of limiting for some folks, especially if you are applying for a job that isn't where your school is and don't have, flexibility with going to online classes or having, a remote job. So that can be pretty challenging, but it works really well for folks who either have flexibility with their school and they can go remotely, or if they're, applying to a job that's in their local area. But so Pathways positions, you have to be in school. And then most Pathways positions have the opportunity to convert, what's called convert, the folks that are in those positions to permanent positions once they graduate. So what happened with me, I had kind of like a little bit of even like a wild ride once I started in Pathways. So the position that I started with Joshua Tree National Park was a term Pathways, which meant that I could only work in that position for a year, and I did not that position was not geared toward, what's the word I'm looking for, converting the individual in that position to a permanent job at the end of it. So I worked for a year, and then at the end, I wasn't in a permanent position. But I was really lucky that Joshua Tree National Park was recruiting another Pathways position in interpretation, which is kind of how I started working in more general interpretation with the general public. So I was still going to school. I hadn't graduated yet. I applied for another job that was in operations, which is the branch of interpretation that works with the public. So in visitor centers, delivering public programs, to individuals of all ages, not just students. And that was a position that was geared toward converting the individual in that position. So when I graduated with my bachelor's of fish and wildlife, I was able to be converted into a permanent employee position. So that was how I got my permanent job here at Joshua Tree. So
Wow,
yeah,
that's excellent. It's great to talk about this because the Pathways program, I mean, there's not as many opportunities out there as, like, say, a seasonal position, but it sounds like an amazing opportunity to bridge that gap between getting experience, right, when you're still in college, getting that experience and being able to go into those permanent positions. And for our audience, the difference between being a seasonal employee, let's say, versus a permanent position means you get benefits, you get retirement, you get great medical. So it's really a great program for a lot of folks to go through. But what I'm really curious about is, so when you were working through with the Park Service through this program, was it full time?
so my position at the park was full time, but the requirement for my position was only that I went to school at least half time. So I was able to take 6 credit, which was for my school half time because full time was 12 credits or more. So I took 6 credits, which meant I usually took 2 to 3 courses in a term. And I was in a school that went by quarters. And so I took 2 to 3 classes every quarter. And then summer break, you don't have to take classes. They do give you a break there. But I was full time in my position at Joshua Tree. That being said, if you are applying for a Pathways position, call the hiring official that is listed on that job posting if you have questions about the specifics of the position. Some of the questions that you can ask include, one, is this position full time? Would I have to work 40 hours a week, or is there flexibility? Because sometimes you can have that flexibility and you could be able to go to school part-time and work part-time, because going to school while working is really challenging. And I have had coworkers at Joshua Tree who have also been Pathways and have had the opportunity to work like maybe 32 hours a week. So they're only paid for 32 hours a week, but their position allows them to work part-time, or I guess 32 hours is technically full time, but less than 40 hours a week, and go to school. So I was full time, but I think there are some pathways positions where you don't have to be.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like an amazing opportunity. And I know, a lot of us have to put those sacrifices in with our time and trying to get to where we need to be. And I think it's amazing and it sounds challenging, but if you can get through that, then you've got kind of a pathway for getting into a full-time career in the public land management agencies, because I know not just Park Service but also the Forest Service utilizes that pathways. Another question I have for you is, so you mentioned that you got experience volunteering with other conservation nonprofit organizations in getting field experience. So do you think that that helped you get a pathways position, or at least made you more competitive?
For sure. Yeah. So the work that I did in nonprofit was employment. So I was working with nonprofit, and I worked in the nonprofit field for about, I guess, about like 6 years before I started working for the National Park Service. And even though my work experience wasn't in the federal government, it definitely made me more competitive than other folks. So, for example, the work that I was doing in environmental education is exactly the type of work that I ended up doing in the National Park Service. So even though it was different agency, different organization, I was learning how to teach students of all ages about, natural and cultural resources. And I had that experience of managing groups and working with chaperones and working with school groups. So I think the experience that you get, regardless of whether it's federal or not, is really valuable. I also did volunteer with federal agencies when I started going back to school. Because when I first started going back to school for fisheries and wildlife sciences, I thought maybe I wanted to work doing like biological field work. And
Hmm.
I really love fish. So I thought I wanted to work in the field with fish. So I volunteered with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife doing fish surveys. And
Uh-huh.
that work helped me too because I had familiarity with, a government agency.
Yeah, so it sounds like those opportunities that you took volunteering with these conservation nonprofit organizations really it was a good opportunity for you to explore exactly what you wanted to do, and you could see and know, okay, maybe that's not what I want to go into, but over here, this is what I really like to do, which is environmental education.
Oh, yeah. I think volunteering is a great way to learn about the positions that are a good fit for you, your skills, and your interests that are kind of like lower stakes, because it's scary to take a job you're not
Yeah.
sure you're going to like, but it's not very
Uh-huh.
scary to take like a shorter term volunteer position that you're not sure you're going to like. It's a great way to explore.
Yeah, I would agree. I actually volunteered for the Department of Fish and Game in California, thinking I was going to be a wildlife biologist. And I got that experience and I realized, this really isn't for me. But what it did was it helped guided me to what I ended up doing, which was going into more recreation management, because I just loved it. I loved connecting with people, but also trying to manage and balance human use and enjoyment of our public lands and helping to protect the natural resources out in the forest and national parks. So I also want to ask, what made you really get hooked on this type of career path? What kept you going?
I had kind of the same motivations that you had. I really love the outdoors. I love learning about biological sciences. I love plants. I love the desert. And I love just in general, I love learning, but I also really love people. And so, working in federal land management agencies and the capacity that I have in interpretation and education has allowed me to learn continue learning throughout my adulthood about the resources that I'm working in and the resources that I'm, helping conserve and work with people. So I think that's what really hooked me was the ability to work with all sorts of people and work really closely with others in an outdoor setting that's focused on, conserving the outdoors. So that's what I really like about my job is that kind of mashup of people and nature.
So it sounds like that job or your career path has been really rewarding, but how do you feel that the work that you do overall contributes to public land stewardship?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So because I'm not doing conservation work directly, you know, I guess it can be a more nebulous thing as to how my position supports conservation work. But in interpretation, in the capacities that I've worked, it's all about connecting the public and the park visitors with the resource. So, with the park, with the plants, with the animals that live here to inspire stewardship in them. So, in interpretation, doing public programs and working in the visitor center, you're helping folks learn about the park and you're helping them answer questions and more importantly ask questions so that they're interested in learning and they care about the resource. So they take that information and that connection that they've made with the park home with them. And it helps them want to, support the, potentially share that. It makes them want to share what they've learned with others so that so that others have, some sort of connection with the park. And it also helps them be better stewards in the, outdoor spaces that are closer to home for them, if they're visiting from a far way away. I also,
Absolutely.
yeah, I also manage the park's volunteer program, and volunteerism is a really valuable part of connecting with the park and with a resource. So again,
Hands down.
yeah, again, it's inspiring that stewardship. So I think when you're working with people, you're just inspiring them to care about something that you care about.
Yes, I completely agree. I think it's a very important career or job to have and super rewarding. And you get to work in some amazing places. I mean, the Park Service, those are the national treasures of the nation. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
it's
it's really cool.
yeah, really great. So are there any skills that you have acquired working for the National Park Service that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise?
I mean, I think that one of the skills I have learned throughout my career, but especially in the National Park Service, is patience and trust. So, in the National Park Service, it is a government agency and there is a lot of bureaucracy and we have a lot of specialists. And it's really important that we're all able to work together and trust each other and let each other do our jobs. So, we all have our own perspectives on how projects should go and how, different things in our jobs should be managed. But it's really important to be patient with each other and to kind of like have that understanding that we all have different focuses and we all have different knowledge bases. So it's really important to trust each other and, kind of let go of some of that control. That's one thing that's been really helpful for me in the Park Service. And I think overall benefits the park as a whole and resource conservation. It's not feeling like you have to know everything or that you have to be in charge of everything.
Yeah, and with that, by trusting each other, I mean, you're all working toward the same goal, which is resource protection of our public lands, which I think is really great.
For
So,
sure.
how do you work with those specialists? What are you engaged with? Okay,
So the way that I work with others in the park is pretty multifaceted. Now my priority is managing the volunteer program, and I like to describe my role as like the quote unquote HR, the human resources of volunteers. So I do a lot of the administrative aspect. I do a lot of paperwork, I do a lot of planning, I help create local policy because there is an overarching policy by which the National Park Service sites, like Joshua Tree National Park, have to manage our programs. So I help support all divisions, but we have Joshua Tree National Park has four divisions: administration, interpretation, protection, and maintenance. So, and then we have some other folks who work in the park with like fire management, but those are our four major divisions. So volunteers support all of those operations in many capacities. I like to say that volunteer is a pay grade. It's not a title. We have a lot of skilled volunteers that do really skilled work. And at Joshua Tree National Park, we have about 27,000 volunteer hours each year, which equates to about 14 full-time staff. You know,
Wow.
federal land management agencies are pretty underfunded and understaffed, so volunteers are really important.
Yep.
But the way that
Mhm.
I support those divisions and the folks in those divisions is basically helping figure out how they can engage volunteers in their workforce in a way that is in line with policy and that's safe for the volunteer and that's mutually beneficial so that the volunteer is getting, a good experience and getting something out of it, and that the park is benefiting from that volunteer's work. So I know a little bit about everything, which is really cool about my job.
That's incredible. And, what you do, I know it's more indirect than direct as far as being, boots on the ground and actually getting the work done. But what you're doing is orchestrating a small army of volunteers that are getting the work done, like you said, in agencies that are understaffed and need the help to make sure that our public lands are managed sustainably and responsibly and keep them protected. So I think it's a very important career path to go down. But is there anything that you wish you would have known sooner to further your career working for the Park Service?
I don't think there's anything that I wish I had known or that I wish I had done differently. I really value having a job that makes me feel good, that I feel proud to talk about. And my experience in nonprofit before I worked with the NPS was really valuable to me. And getting that degree in business before I got my degree in fish and wildlife, it helped get me where I am today. So I think something that's important for maybe young people who are thinking about careers in federal agencies that is valuable for them to know is that there are all sorts of things you can do in federal agencies. The way that they operate is similar to just like any other business. Like I mentioned earlier, we have, folks that work in administration, in resources, and protection, and interpretation. We have all sorts of folks working at Joshua Tree National Park. So basically, anyone who has skill sets and professional preferences for what they're doing and how they're doing it can fit into the National Park Service. So I think it's important to note that there are diverse careers in the NPS.
Yeah, and like you said, and what I think is great that you wouldn't change anything about your career path because obviously, at least to me, your experience working with nonprofit organizations in conservation helped you guide your where your career path was going to go and get experience that helped you get into the Pathways program, which is fantastic. And
Yep.
so, we've talked about how understaffed our federal public land management agencies are right now, and it's been a struggle because I think one of the biggest factors is that USA Jobs, the federal hiring process, is extremely difficult to get into. But not only that, I think a lot of people don't understand what they need to do for their career path to even get a great resume application through that process. So based on that, like, what do you think is really important to share with folks that are interested or want to pursue an outdoor career with the federal government, like the Park Service, and get into this type of job?
Yeah, I think talking to someone who has experience applying for and obtaining federal jobs is really valuable. Applying for a job on USA Jobs, applying for a federal position is not the same as applying to, a community organization or a nonprofit or, private sector position. It's I don't know why it is the way it is, but it's really different.
Very different.
Yeah, the process is really confusing. It's really long. Your resume is going to be so many pages, it's going to be embarrassing because the way that my understanding of how federal hiring works is, you apply through this main portal, USA Jobs, which is how you apply for every federal government position. And the first person to see your application and your resume is someone who doesn't work for that park and doesn't work in that position. So they're
No, they're
basically,
they're usually a person in human resources that
yeah,
does not understand what it is that these careers do out in the field, or just in general, they have no clue. So you really have to spell it out in those applications and your resume.
exactly. Exactly. It's like, the only information they have is the information that the hiring manager, the supervisor has provided them, and they have to match that to the information that you have provided in your application. So that's why our federal resumes get so long, is because we have to make sure we're saying every single thing we've ever done and how many hours we spent doing it and all that stuff. So writing a federal resume is really challenging because it's very different than the way that people write their resumes for, the private sector or the nonprofit sector. And when I say many pages, I'm not joking. My resume is 26 pages and it's
Yeah.
embarrassing, but it's the way it has to be. And then
Yeah,
the other
it,
thing
it
is,
really
mhm.
is. But where can people go to get help with this?
Yeah, I know that Life in the Wildlands provides resume assistance. And Becky, I know you have, years of experience in the Forest Service. And you have hired people. And I think that's really valuable. There might also be, some information on USA Jobs itself. There might be, some how to's and stuff. I think having someone kind of like walk through those things with you is helpful too. But yeah, I think going to folks who have experience hiring or at least have a lot of experience getting hired is really important.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the resources that are free provided out there right now with USA Jobs or the Forest Service and Park Service, I've sat in on many different workshops for resume development, and they're not friendly. They're not very, what's the word? I think if I were a person that had no experience working in federal government, it would all go over my head. So I think it's important that people seek out services where even if it's a little bit of an investment, of people that like Life in the Wildlands that are trying to do these types of services to help people through the process, might be a good investment.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many intricacies of getting hired for the federal government. It's really valuable to just have some folks on your team. Another thing I can say besides, resume building is there's often a questionnaire associated with the hiring process, that
Yes.
is specific to the things you'll be doing in the position.
Mhm.
Sometimes you'll apply for a job and you literally won't hear back about that job for 12 months. So it can be
Yes.
really long, and it's just really valuable to have someone who knows what's normal so that you don't feel, cuckoo while you're applying for jobs.
Yeah, and also, like, we know when the hiring events are with Life in the Wildlands, I'm not sure about the Park Service. It seems to be very in line with the Forest Service, though, that entry-level jobs are only advertised in these huge hiring events only a couple times a year. So you really need to know when those dates are and not expect that if you're going to get right out of college that you're going to apply and get these types of positions because the hiring event has already been over months before.
Yeah, I don't, because I had a unique experience and I did not work seasonally in the NPS before I got my pathways job and then got a permanent job. I'm not as familiar with, the hiring events that the NPS has, but I do know that many of the entry level positions in the NPS are seasonal jobs. So those are 6 months or less,
Mhm.
that are 6 months or less positions that are hired at each park. So
And
each park,
usually advertised in the fall as well. So the fall before,
mhm,
the actual summer season where that job, so there's going to be 6 months from when you put that application in
yep,
to when you actually start, which I think is important for a lot of our audience to know because it's
yep,
not, the federal agencies are not like a private sector job where you put in a resume and then all of a sudden, a week later, you're getting an interview or whatnot. It doesn't work like that. It's a very lengthy process. So I just recommend to everybody out there that's wanting to get into one of those entry level positions that think about the timing, like contact Life in the Wildlands, because we can tell you exactly when those job announcements will be had or those job announcements will be posted to actually even apply. So something
yep.
to keep in mind out there, everybody.
Yeah, for sure. And then it also depends on, if you have a specific park or parks you're interested in working in. Like for instance, Joshua Tree, our season is actually fall through spring. So we're unique in that a lot of parks are quote unquote summer parks. So, for example, Yosemite National Park and, Shenandoah National Park. Those are sites that they have their most visitors in the summer. So that's when they hire their seasonals, which are the folks who supplement those permanent staff because the park's busier. At Joshua Tree, it is very hot in the summer, so that is our slow. We never have a slow season, but that's our slower season. And then fall through spring is when we hire our seasonals because that's when we need more support. So another one of the intricacies.
Yeah, no, and that's great to know because there are some parks, I'm sure, that are similar to Joshua Tree where you can gain, seasonal employment through the winter time, whereas most national forests and national parks, the peak season, is the summertime, which is when you're going to be working. And it's
Yep.
just good to know that there are other options out there. So if you do get into a seasonal position, you're able through the summertime with many different options with national parks and the Forest Service that there are winter positions available. They just might be a little bit more competitive than others
Yep.
because there's much fewer of those positions available, but it is an option for folks.
Yep. For sure.
Well, great. So, Sasha, we're getting toward the end of the interview. Is there any other advice that you would give to somebody that's trying to pursue a career with interpretation with the Park Service?
Yeah, definitely. If you can volunteer experience does count. It really helps you learn more about what you like and what you don't like. It's also really helpful for you to kind of demonstrate your knowledge and your commitment to interpretation or getting that experience in your chosen career field. The other thing that I recommend is being flexible. So with the National Park Service, I'm sure it's really similar with the Forest Service. The more flexible you can be about either the positions that you are applying for or the locations you are applying for, the more likely it's going to be that you are going to get selected for a job. And once you start kind of like getting that experience in the federal agencies, then you'll be able to be more competitive for the jobs that are more your ideal jobs. So having that flexibility about where you're living or what you're doing when you're first getting into the field is really, really valuable because then you learn more about the agency, you learn more about the job, the jobs you like, the jobs you don't like, the places you like living, the places you don't like living. And it will help you kind of narrow your options as you become more experienced. Life in the Wildlands is a great resource for folks who want to get more information about careers in the federal service.
Yeah, and we are here to help you with your federal resume. Sasha just shared with us her resume is 26 pages. Mine is about 21. And we've been in, these positions for a while. Yours doesn't need to be that long, but it is a work in progress. And we are here to help guide you on your career path to these amazing positions. And I hope at this point you've heard other stories on our podcast about why people do these jobs. And it's because we get to work out in some amazing places and get to do some good quality work that helps sustain our public lands and help keep them protected.
Yeah, one more thing I do want to add, since I'm not sure what your listenership is like. In federal agencies, I know personally the National Park Service, we need more young people. We need more people from the newer generations. We need more folks with diverse ideas and diverse experiences. So,
Absolutely.
yeah, it's really valuable for young people who have had, like different goals and different life experiences to start a career in federal land management agencies. We need some diversity.
And there's so many opportunities out there. You don't have to work in a cubicle. I mean,
You could
if
work in a
that's
cubicle if you want, though.
yeah, if you want to. And if you do, then at least you know that the work that you're doing is going to help contribute to that conservation level of public land management. It's a great opportunity. And even if you work in a cubicle, you might have some opportunities to get out there in the field and get paid for it and have fun. So,
Yep. That's one of the reasons I like my job because I have the monotony and the predictability of doing office work, but then I also get to get into the field with volunteers sometimes. And so I have a good balance that really works well for me.
well, thank you so much, Sasha. You have definitely shared a lot of information, great information about the Park Service and how people can get into this type of career field. And I appreciate you sharing your advice on what people can do to get there in this type of career field, because it is really important that we have jobs like this that educate the public. Our public land management really depends on how people view public lands and how they're managed. And it's just great that you're in a position where you can do that. So I love it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for having me. And I'm glad that, with all of your experience in the Forest Service, that you're a resource for folks who are trying to get into federal careers. So thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Sasha. And maybe we'll have you on another time. It was great talking with you.
That sounds great. All right.
All right, take care. Thank you to our audience for joining in with us today. I hope this was excellent information for you that's valuable, that you too can get an outdoor job working for the federal government. It's some of the most rewarding careers out there. So stay tuned for the next episode. For more stories about outdoor careers, subscribe to the Life in the Wildlands podcast, where I will be interviewing outdoor professionals to discover exciting opportunities in outdoor careers, share professional experiences, discuss the hurdles to federal employment, and provide advice on how to overcome these challenges. And if you're interested in outdoor jobs and don't know where to start, or if you already are a federal employee with an outdoor career but struggling to make it to the next level in your career development, Life in the Wildlands can help you on your journey. Check out our career counseling and federal resume development services at www.lifeinthewildlands.com or call 406-848-1660.